be with you all for the second time. So today we have a session that I titled Assessing Digital Business Models. So it's a bit related to what we talked about in our very first meeting, and I hope that in these weeks that followed, you have had a chance a little bit to start tasting the core topics, right? The core categories of a management program and a management career. So we've talked about finance, and we've talked about marketing, and we've talked about a bunch of topics that entrepreneurship, right? That are at the core. And as I said the first time, and I want to stress it today as well, we look at these webinars as a foundation, not just as a webinar to pass the time or to keep busy while we wait for the beginning of the program, but at least I take it as a chance to build some core concepts of what we're going to do later in the courses. In this case, for example, a strategy course, or even later, advanced courses in digital strategy and so on. Okay. So the idea today is to talk about business models first, and then see what change digitalization has created in how we assess business models, right? And for that, we need to go back to an idea that we saw last time. We saw some basic distinctions about strategy and thinking strategically. And we put out the concept of a business model. So we need a little bit of refreshing about what a business model is. And then I will go into describing different types of business models that are standard. Right? As you can see here in today's agenda, understanding, and maybe some of you already have that knowledge, right? But I'm pretty sure many of you don't and have not seen at least this framing, right? Of what a volume-driven business is versus a margin-driven business. And that will be our first point. And then in the second and third points, we'll talk about some features, some particular characteristics of current digital business models, right? So what digitalization has done is not completely change the way we understand strategy or the way we understand the business model of a company, but it has added things, it has added possibilities, right? And that has led to the creation and the becoming very popular of business models such as platforms that existed in the past, but were a bit marginal. Right? There were companies running a platform in the past when there was no internet, but they were not a focus. Whereas today, thanks to the internet and the digital technologies, platform businesses are becoming widespread and I would say even dominant. Okay? So we need to understand those businesses. And then later on, a little bit of examples and discussion about different variations of that platform model and typical business models that we call subscription models or freemium models and so on. So all of this, obviously, when I mention the examples for these business models, you'll recognize them immediately because they are very, very popular, right? So the point here is to, again, as I did last time, try to simplify our frames, the way we analyze and see things, so we can apply them to any business, to any company, and say reasonably smart things about them, which is what we really want to do, to ask reasonable questions, to make reasonable conclusions and insights into those businesses. What is a business model? Remember that in the last session, I told you that there were two very big strategy questions. One big strategy question was where to play. And that kept a lot of CEOs and top teams busy in companies. And it's a complex decision or set of decisions that requires a lot of analysis. There are many possibilities. But there was a second question that was about how to compete once you've chosen those places. And in this how to compete, space, there are a number of choices. Companies choose how to compete, and they build their business model by making several choices that are not independent from each other, of course. They are related to each other. So the choices they make in, for example, as you can see here, in the type of product that they offer, is very related to the type of channel. Right? Certain products have to be put in certain channels. If you change your product, you probably will have to revise a lot or just a little the channel you are using to distribute it. So these choices are interrelated. What I want to draw your attention, and by the way, I haven't said it, but please, I'm reading the chat, so any questions, comments, and whenever I ask you a question, right, put it in the chat. But I also do not mind if you want to turn on your mic, raise your hand, and talk directly, right, and pop up in the window and talk to me and to all of us directly. But if you don't want to do that, or you can't, just use the chat. So what I want to draw your attention here is to this very last part in here. Okay. Costs and revenue streams. Because many times the problem we have in strategy is that it's so wide and complex, right? It encompasses everything that the company does, the big plan and everything, as you can see in here, all these choices. And many of these choices are qualitative, right? They are not driven by a number. The type of product we choose, the type of customer we choose, the type of channel we choose, these are not measurable concepts, right? That leads to a lot of what we would say faffing. In strategy, you can faff people to death. Right? We're just talking about the markets, the goodness of the industry, the elements of the industry, the customer preferences, etc., etc. It's all words. Right? Whenever we have a chance to put some numbers into that analysis, please, Ruchi, control my voice. Some people are saying that the voice is not very clear. Okay, so maybe, I mean, obviously we have issues that are individual of you, or maybe it is mine, so okay, good. So what I was saying is, whenever we have a chance to put some numbers into that analysis, whenever we have a chance to measure something, it just clarifies the analysis very, very much. Now, there's a danger of just trusting the numbers in strategy, right? There are important qualitative issues that you always have to take into account. But numbers help you anchor your thinking, anchor your insights into the goodness or the badness of a strategy. And it also helps you actually describe a business model, right? It's a good starting point. Right? What kind of numbers are we talking about? At a very simple level, we're talking about profits. We're talking about, as we said before, revenues. We're talking about costs. Okay? So there is a way, and you will see business models described in different ways, right? Many times described in words. And if you know something called the business model canvas, you will see that there are different elements in there that all need to be described, and altogether they are a business model. But there's a particular way of describing a business model that, for the reasons I just mentioned, I like, which is just looking at the way the company makes money. It's a very direct way, right? How does this company make money? How does this company get money from the customers, and that we call revenues? How does this money spend this money? How does this company spend this money in doing the things that they promised for the customers? And these are choices made by the company that are very determinant of the way the company competes, the way the company tries to be better than the others. So if you start with a very simple formula that you can clearly understand intuitively, or you've already seen in previous courses, right? On, for example, how the profit for a company could be described as the number of units sold, which is also called volume, times the profit per unit. Right? So the total profit of the company, number of units sold, times the profit that each one of those units is generating. Very simple formula. Now I need to expand this formula a little bit more. The number of units sold, the volume, it's clear. It's a concept, it's a number. Any company will tell you how many units they sold in a given month, year, or week. The profit per unit, let's break it down a little bit more. Okay. Now, I would like for you to do this just little quick exercise. What do you think is inside this profit per unit? How would you calculate this profit per unit? Okay. So if you had to break down this profit per unit into a sub-formula with 2 or 3 more concepts, what would that be? Okay. So you can write it in the chat, or you can write it in your notebook. And just try to, I'll give you a few seconds to just think about that. Right, so now many people are writing selling price minus cost price, right? Price per unit minus cost per unit, right? There is a little bit more distinction we can make, right? Because now some people, rightly so, are starting to break down a little bit those costs, and they are telling us that the cost includes the cost of materials, includes the cost of overhead of administrative salaries. It might include the manufacturing cost. So there's a number of costs in there. So we could break it essentially into price and 2 types of costs. The variable operating cost, which is, well, the variable operating cost is the cost that I incur every time I make another unit. Right? It's depending on the number of units that I sell. If I sell 10 units, I have to spend 10 times that variable cost. If I sell 1,000 units, I have to spend 1,000 times that variable cost. But there's another type of cost that we call fixed. That is a cost that I have to spend regardless of the number of units that I sell. The salary of the CEO of a company does not depend on the number of units the company sells. You have to pay him his salary, or her his salary, her salary. But the amount of raw material that I need to spend depends on the number of units that I sell. I'll buy this much raw material for this much units that I sell. But the fixed cost I cannot touch. So it's always worth, and as you will start studying financial reporting and financial accounting, you will see that that distinction is crucial. The differentiating the variable versus the fixed. That is an important distinction because it helps us define what a volume-driven business is versus a margin-driven business. That was the first distinction I told you we need to make. Okay? And it's a classification of types of business models that comes from the very beginning. Okay? This is not part of the digital world. There's always been volume-driven businesses and margin-driven businesses. So what is a volume-driven business? What do you think, how can you see that a company has a volume-driven business, a business model that is about volume? It is about where the company puts the priority in this formula. You agree? It's about where the company puts the optimization goal. If in this formula I'm trying to make profit, right? Because every company tries to make profit in the end. But if in this formula I'm trying to make profit by maximizing the number of units sold, and I forget a little bit about the rest, right? I'm trying to maximize as high as possible the number of units sold, then I have a volume-driven business. It's about selling units. Conversely, if what I'm trying to maximize is this part of the equation, the price minus variable operating cost, which incidentally we call contribution margin. And there are many names for this. Right? Someone said gross margin. Yes, you're right, gross margin. Okay? But a typical, very standard name for this is the contribution margin. Right? So if I'm trying to maximize this at the expense of anything else, then I have a margin-driven business. Right? So this very simple choice of whether you want to be a volume-driven business or a margin-driven business determines a lot of the things that the company will have to do. A lot. Say you are a volume-driven business. Right? So now the entire company is focused on selling volume, selling units. What do you have to do with your price? You always want to sell one more unit. So the emphasis, of course you don't want to lose money, but the emphasis is that you will have to keep reducing the price if the competitors are matching you, because you want to get that extra unit. So that already creates a pricing strategy. And if you keep reducing the price, at some point you will realize that the contribution margin, price minus variable cost, maybe starts turning negative. And that's not good, because if you have a negative contribution margin, what happens? The more units you sell, the more money you lose. So you'll start worrying about that negative contribution margin. So then what do you need to do? If the price has to be low or lower every time, and the variable cost starts matching that price, where do I have to put the emphasis? Now I need to work on reducing that variable cost, right? To create a little bit of margin. Otherwise, I'm just not making any money. So we have two big choices that come from a volume-driven strategy. My pricing strategy will always be like, let's try to keep lowering the price whenever necessary. I don't lower it because I like to, but I have to. The other is, let's really work on the cost structure. What can we do with raw materials? What can we do with the labor? What can we do with our energy costs? And all the things that allow the contribution margin to breathe a little bit. So these are already two very big choices that the company is making by choosing to be a volume-driven business. If I happen to choose a margin-driven business model, now my emphasis, my priority is to protect this margin, to make it as big as possible at the expense of the number of units. So now my pricing strategy is high price or higher within the industry. I will always try to work on my cost, but my cost now, because I have a high price, is not so much a concern. And to all of you, like I see Ronnie is saying, reduce the operating cost. Anuj is saying, keep the price high, try to reduce the variable cost. What is the problem that I'm facing when I keep the price high, whenever I want to reduce the variable cost? You see a problem there? Of course, I want to make that margin big, but as I try to reduce the operating cost, what do I realize? Why are the customers buying at a high price? Exactly. For example, because the product has high quality, because the product has a lot of features, because the product has a lot of service attached. It's not only quality, but because the product has a very good brand. So all the things that I just said cost money. Sometimes cost a lot of money. So if you want to put quality in the product so people pay a high price, you have to put good materials inside. So that becomes very tricky when you want to reduce operating cost. Sometimes you just can't. So the operating cost will be difficult to reduce. Of course, you can always do something in the margins. But what you need to focus is in really justifying that high price and protect that margin, regardless of the number of units, because now you need to sell less units, right? Since every unit is giving you more money, you can make the same profit that the volume-driven business is making by selling less, fewer units. So now you have two basic business models. A company that competes by trying to sell as much unit as possible at a low margin, at a thin margin, and a company that tries to sell fewer units but at a better margin. And this separates companies in an industry very cleanly. Very cleanly. Now, some additional characteristics of these two business models, right? Because this is a choice that companies have to make. It's a very fundamental choice. I'll follow through with this example maybe a little bit more, but a company I know, right, that makes electrical cable. Worldwide leader in electrical cables. Some thin, some very thick. Some very big that go under the ocean, some very simple that just connect your lamp to the socket. Electrical cables. Now this company has traditionally been a company volume driven. And being volume driven meant that the managers in that company were thinking, how many kilometers of cable have we sold this month? And that meant that the manager of the company had goals based on, we need to sell this many kilometers of cable this month. So the salespeople go out and they'll do anything to reach that goal. So if they have to strike a deal for a customer to place a big order by giving them a big discount, they will be allowed to do it because the goal is kilometers of cable. And by trying to make money with that, if they keep making more and more discounts, this company has to focus very much on reducing the costs and doing the cable as cheaply as possible. Now, this company, which is an Italian company, but it's worldwide leader, has a problem. At some point, there is some competitor that does this volume-driven business better. Because, for example, they are operating out of China or out of Korea or out of Southeast Asia, and they have much lower labor costs. So they always have an advantage in keeping variable costs low. So they always have room to keep lowering the price more and more because all they want is sell kilometers of cable. So this company at some point has a real problem in competing with this type of companies. So they switch. They felt like they had to switch. Now this company has to transform itself from being a volume-driven business to a margin-driven business. And they have to learn a lot of new things, and they have to change a lot of their processes. Because now they have to do a lot of more research and development, R&D. They have to do a lot more marketing to tell people that it's worth buying cables at this higher price. They have to increase the quality of that cable. They have to give much better service to their customers. So companies do this, right? It's a fundamental choice. We are following a business model that was about volume, that determined a lot of our strategy, and now we are going for margin different, okay? Clear so far? I see some of you have asked me some questions. Rhea asked me, can we call Apple as an example of margin-driven model? I think we totally can, right? You can see how Apple is not competing in a small segment, for example, for iPhones. It's competing in a large market, but does not budge in terms of pricing. Keeps a high price no matter what, and protects its margin. And whenever they can reduce the cost, the margin just gets bigger. But they are very protective of that margin. They could sell more iPhones if they just drop the prices. They would still make a good profit. The contribution margin would still be positive. But that's not their business model. Their business model is to maximize the margin and see how many we can sell. Of course, at some point, maybe because of competition, Apple realizes that people are not buying anymore. So the number of units they're selling is not enough to create the profit that they're seeking. So maybe they will have to transform themselves and become more volume driven and sacrifice that margin for the sake of units. But right now it is a margin driven business. I mean, Bardolet says, is it possible to follow both models parallelly? With the same product, it's not, right? It's not possible. You have to choose, because these choices are so fundamental and how you present yourself to the market that you cannot play with both. You're confusing customers. Are you a cheap option or are you a premium option? You have to choose. Chinese phone makers have more of a volume-driven business, for sure. Okay? With different SKUs, potentially, but then we have all these issues about brands, right? If Apple now launched a cheap product that it's not the iPhone, right? Is that consistent with the Apple brand? Is that consistent with the general way Apple manufactures things? The general amount of money that Apple spends in marketing or distribution, right? So you would have to create almost two companies to do that, which some companies do, right? When they really feel like they need to play in both fields, in both areas, volume and margin, they create two companies and two different brands, and then each one does its own thing. Okay? So let me just move to some more characteristics of this, but are along the same lines, right? Just to reinforce a little bit this difference. Okay? In a volume business, it's about price competition, so the margins will always be sacrificed. In a margin business, price is premium, margins are healthy. You can see that for a volume business, production tends to be larger than for a margin business. Just if the emphasis is in number of units, of course you end up producing much bigger amounts or numbers. And that has an advantage for each company, in the sense that once you focus on number of units sold and in volume, you are forced to manufacture a lot more. And when you manufacture a lot more, because there's something called economies of scale, your cost per unit starts decreasing. So when we were saying before, a volume business sacrifices the price, but then focuses on reducing the cost, that actually is helped because of the large numbers that we are producing. The more we sell, the more we produce, the cheaper it becomes to produce every unit. A very simple way to understand this is the salary of the CEO is spread out over many more units in large production companies. So the contribution of that salary to every unit becomes smaller and smaller and smaller. Same for all the other costs. So the cost per unit when we are making large volumes tends to decrease. So it is consistent with what we've said. But of course, you have to keep lowering costs, so less frequent innovation, less marketing, and so on, right? You have to sacrifice a lot of cost. For a volume business, every little bit of price increase has a huge effect in the final profit. So in good times, a volume business likes to increase the price because we are selling so many units that just a little increase in each one of them in the margin has a big impact. A margin business experiences a different phenomenon. Every additional unit that I sell has a huge impact in my profit because I'm putting that big margin, I'm adding that big margin to the total profit. So we've talked about some examples, but would you say the typical retail business is a volume-driven business? And I'm talking about grocery retailing or food retail, for example. Right? I'm talking about Big Bazaar or D-Marts and so on. Is this a volume-driven business or a margin-driven business? Absolutely, right? Volume-driven, very good. Margins there are very thin. Retailers tend to make about 1% margin. And when everything after taking out all the costs, it's 1, 2, 3% margin. They have to sell a lot of units to end up making a good profit. Notice that these two concepts, volume-driven business, margin business, don't disappear when you go online. We're talking about digital business models, right? So when you go in the digital space, you still have these variables to account for, to choose. When we talk about e-commerce, when we're talking about platforms like Amazon, when we're talking about platforms like Flipkart and so on, these platforms, these e-commerce giants, are not working with big contribution margins at all. It's about volume. And that's what gives the giants an advantage. And that's what makes smaller companies at a disadvantage to compete with them. Because the margins are very thin, because the prices keep dropping. And you need a very large volume to make money. Now, if you are a big giant, retailing giant, you can make that volume. If you're not, very, very difficult. Okay? Yes, Alan, discounts tend to be short-run adjustments, yes. Sometimes they become a policy, right? If you're really lowering prices, you disguise them as discounts, but it's really like a lowering of prices, but tend to be temporary adjustments. Paraman says, what should be done if the result of maximizing the number of volumes or minimizing the variable cost comes out the same? Maybe I don't understand it fully, that question. But yeah, a 5-star, Nea says, a 5-star hotel, right? This is a margin-driven business. You need to make margin on every booking because the number of units, first, it's constrained by the physical space. You have only so many beds. But then also because not that many people, obviously, go to 5-star hotels. There is one particular thing, and the point number 5 in the margin business that I want to stress. We tend to think of margin businesses as niche businesses, right? Because I said high price, premium, high end, etc., etc. So all those choices seem to imply that this is only for the high end segment. That's not necessarily true, and we just saw an example of that. Apple in the smartphone industry, in the smartphone market, goes for the whole market, right? It's a mass market competitor, but it's a margin-driven business. So even though you're going to see almost all of the niche-focused businesses, right? The businesses that focus only on a small segment of the market, are margin driven, because the moment you are niche, you are constraining the number of units, right? You're constraining the volume. So you have to make money on the margin. There are also mass market companies that are about protecting the margin. Good. So I think at this point, I want to move on. Hope it's clear, this distinction. Okay? And I want to stress, once you choose one or the other, a lot of the choices inside the company about what type of product, what type of channel, what type of customer segment, what type of manufacturing process, what type of marketing, what type of etc. Flow naturally from that decision. Okay? So it's not that first you choose and then you decide everything else. It's back and forth, but the distinction is very, very key and very important to bear in mind. So we're moving on from this first point to the second. What is a platform model? Anybody has a quick and intuitive description, your own description of what a platform business model or a digital platform business model is? Not so much an example, but a description, right? So you said online model. Not all online models are a platform. Not all e-commerce is a platform. In fact, most of e-commerce is not a platform. Some people are coming closer, right? A place where you facilitate other businesses coming to the customers, providing services for sellers to sell their products, a model that bridges the gap between two parties, right? Yeah, they're coming closer to that. And the examples that you're mentioning, like Zomato, for example, definitely are platforms, right? So my goal here is not so much to define what a platform is, but we start there, but it's to describe some key characteristics of platforms to take into account, right? The distinction here from a platform is what we call a pipeline business. And the pipeline business is a traditional business, the one we've always seen. What is a traditional business? A business where there is a supplier that sells something to the manufacturer, for example, or the service company. The supplier sells some inputs. The manufacturing company or the service company does something with those inputs, creating a product or keeps them, and then sells them to the customers. So for those of you who said Amazon actually started being a pipeline business, not a platform. Because Amazon would buy books from publishers and then other products as well, would put them in a warehouse, and then would sell them online to a bunch of customers. This is not a platform. This is a traditional business. Amazon is just substituting the bookstore. It's putting the bookstore online, but it's buying the books from the publisher and selling them to customers. Okay? That's not a platform. What is a platform? Platform is when Amazon becomes simply the place where bookstores or booksellers or publishing houses sell their stuff to the customers directly. As some of you say, exactly. That means Amazon doesn't have to keep inventory, doesn't have to buy the books. All Amazon does in this model is connecting a seller and a buyer. Then the seller takes over. The seller and the buyer interact and the purchase is made, and the seller takes the book or the product, sends it to the customer. What Amazon did was facilitate. Okay? So now we are, I think, coming closer to the core of what a platform is. Okay? This facilitation space, this marketplace, this area, and most of them online, where buyers and sellers meet, But it's not only buyers and sellers. I mean, the definition extends, right? Is Facebook a platform? Yes, it is. And what does Facebook sell? Well, for many people, Facebook sells friendship, relationship. And who are the sellers? Well, we are. We put our pictures up there, and we put our updates, and we put our news, and we put our content. And there is people we know that consume that content, right? So Facebook is like Amazon. It's just that the buyers and sellers are the same people, and they are not transacting with prices, right? They're not buying and selling stuff, but they are in a way. Okay? So what we have is a platform, company, that connects different what we call sites, right? And hence, many times we talk about multi-sided platforms. Sometimes it's 2 sites, sometimes it's many more, not necessarily only 2 buyers and sellers. Okay? You go to Facebook, we have the users, but we also have the advertisers that do a lot of business in there and interact a lot with the users. And we might have also the companies that make games, and we might have potentially other types of sites, although Facebook is basically those. If you go to LinkedIn, right, we have the people who put up their profiles up there and connect and talk with each other, much like Facebook, but you also have the companies that are using LinkedIn to recruit, and you also have advertisers that are using just the platform to advertise, and so on and so forth. Okay? So it is two-way, a multiple way bottleneck, Ganesh, which connects multiple entities. So now we have a lot of the examples that you're mentioning, Facebook, Paytm, Trivago, are platforms. So let's dig down a little bit more into some features of the platforms. The first feature that you need to know, like the palm of your hand, about platforms is the concept of network effects. Crucial concept to understand platforms and to value platforms. Network effects. Then we can talk about some difficulties to get started, to launch a platform, monetize a platform, etc. But the very first point and the second, right, is network effects. So what are network effects? Network effects directly determine the value of a platform. And network effects are these effects by which an increase in the number of participants in the platform increases the value of the product or service that the platform is delivering. So it's very simple to understand. If you think about a platform with only 1 buyer and 1 seller, has very little value. Because if the seller doesn't have what the buyer wants, there's no transaction whatsoever. The same platform with 1,000 buyers and 1,000 sellers has a lot of transactions, because the buyers eventually will find what they're looking for in one of the sellers. That's a network effect. The size of the platform determines the value of the platform. The more people in there, the more valuable it is for the people in there. Right? I don't want to be on Facebook if there's only 2 other people on Facebook. But I am attracted to Facebook if I see that that's a network that connects millions of people. Because I'll find stuff. Clear, right? This is a network effect. So the focus of a platform is number of people in the platform. Number of users, number of buyers, number of sellers, number of people interacting in there. The more, the better. And the way analysts think about the value of a platform business is how big can this get? Can this platform that you just thought about, that connects some type of people, can it get gigantic? Because that's a platform that I would like to invest in. And it's like a very first condition. There are many more difficulties in running this type of business. But the first thing that we need to look at is what kind of network effects are there in this platform business. Now, these network effects don't come automatically for all the platforms. Not all platforms are created equal in terms of potential for network effects. Okay. Because this is something that in the press, in the way we talk about platforms, sometimes people talk about platforms like it's a given that network effects are there. So we created this platform, and then thanks to network effects, we'll get it this big and we'll make a lot of money. What can happen? Before I jump into the difficulties or the particularities of these network effects, let me show you this very simple, written on a piece of paper by this guy. He's a venture capitalist. Description of the network effects of Uber. And you can see that the network effects are kind of circular, right? The more demand, the more drivers are attracted to work for Uber. And the more drivers are attracted to work with Uber, the more geographical coverage Uber gets. Right? The more density of drivers and the wider the reach of the network of drivers. So once you expand that geographic coverage and you increase the density of drivers in any particular neighborhood, that means faster pickups. And it means that the drivers are getting a ride all the time. So faster pickups makes customers happy. So more customers will start using Uber because they can get a ride fast. And the fact that drivers, because there are more, they cover more area, they can get busier, Uber can lower the prices because drivers are busy all the time. They are producing money all the time. So you can reduce a little bit the margin that you're making, also the margin that you're giving to them. Reducing the prices has the effect of more demand. So what you're creating with this platform is kind of an effect where the more drivers there are, the more customers are drawn in. And the more customers are drawn in, the more drivers are drawn in. And so on and so forth until the platform starts getting really, really big. That's a network effect at play. And that's the effect that every single platform business is looking for. It's the magic of the platform. It's the big prize. Right? You keep adding more and more and more until there's no more, until you have everybody in your platform. That's the goal that platform businesses are chasing. But there is one big problem. You can only run this process ad infinitum, to the infinite, if two things happen. I'm simplifying a bit, but two things happen. One, if you want this thing to happen, this cycle to happen, you gotta make the entry very, what we call frictionless, very easy. If people are being blocked from entering the platform by fees, by the process of joining, and so on, you don't get this machine running, this cycle of network effects running as fast as you could. So you have to make the entry, especially at the beginning, right? Very simple. If you're trying to create a new social network to compete with Facebook, and you go out in the market and you say, in order to join, you have to give us the credit card number, 3 pages of personal information, and you have to answer a 100-question questionnaire. We really want to know you, right? And we'll match you with people that, you know, like the things that you like. If you put all these things in the process of joining, no one will join. It's too much of a hassle. In today's world, we're not used to any hassle. So even filling out the form is kind of like, okay, I don't want it. So the more difficult you make that entry, the slower it will be, this growth. And if you don't get people joining, you don't get the other people joining. You never get started. So you have to make it as easy as possible. Unless your goal is not that, right? A very nice example of a company that constrains the entry and makes it difficult on purpose is a dating site, an American dating site called eHarmony. And this dating site promises people that they're going to find people a match to get married. And there are Indian versions of that, of course. But this site is particular in the sense that they really constrain entry into this platform. They give people a 200-question questionnaire to join. And now, if I have to answer 200 questions to just get 3 matches that, you know, who knows if they will work, and I have to pay a fee, I think very hard before joining. So what happens when they do this? What people do you think they get to join? People who really, really, really want to get married. And people who have run a little bit out of options, alternatives. So now you have not a very big number, but some people who really want to get married and don't have other alternatives. What's going to happen? They will get married. Once you start giving them matches, and if you do a good job of sort of looking for compatibility and so on, you will get a lot of matches. And those matches will be your marketing. You will tell people, yes, see, I promise you this, and I deliver. So this is an example of a platform that uses this frictionless entry and makes it very full of friction in order to make sure that the people that are inside the platform are the people they want. And this is something to consider in platforms, because it's great to have more and more and more people, more transactions, as Soumya is saying, you know, increasing the number of transactions. What impact does it have in the quality? It does have an impact. It does have an impact. The opposite of eHarmony is Tinder. 0 friction in joining. You need to put there very, very few things. That helps the size of the network. The network effect is there. The quality is not the same. So again, what business model do you want? Okay. Do you want to go full network effect, big platform, or do you want to be more of a niche player? Okay. You can play with that. And the second concept is, for these network effects to really work, people cannot be able to switch to another platform, competing platform. And this brings us to the Uber example, right? I mean, we saw that Uber has this beautiful cycle. But if I can have Uber and Ola in my phone at the same time, and drivers can switch back and forth for the 2 companies, do you see that I'm losing a little bit the power of the network effects? Because I could lose my size anytime. I've amassed millions of users, and then there is another app that comes that offers maybe less prices, a lower price, or a better deal for the drivers. What stops them from all of them switching to the other one immediately? There's not much of a barrier. And when there's not much of a barrier, then the network effect is very very fragile, very weak. It's there, I have the size, Uber has the size, but if tomorrow all the population of Uber drivers and users switch to another app, and it could happen pretty fast if Uber doesn't work on being competitive, I'm done. I lost all my network. There are cases in which this switching is much more difficult. If you have an Apple OS system and you've downloaded all the apps from the store and you got used to using the OS, do you feel like you have more of a friction, more of a cost to going to Android? It's more difficult, right? You'll resist, even if the Android phone is a little better or is a little cheaper, but there is that resistance to change because it's costly for you, not just in money, but in psychologically. That means the Apple platform is much more protected. The Apple network is much more protected and solid than the Uber network. And that means that the platform like OS is much more valuable once it got big than the Uber network. I speak with Uber, but imagine Swiggy, right? You go through all the trouble of putting all those restaurants and all those people working for you and all the users that downloaded the app and are using it. Are you really protected from the people switching to Zomato or any other app tomorrow? A little bit, but not that much, right? And that makes Swiggy a less powerful network in the terms that we're talking. So of course you have to keep the people in by, again, the traditional old way, right? Strong brand, good product, good service. You know, you have to constantly work on making those transactions better and better and better. So Paytm, Facebook, maybe they're a little bit in the middle, right? Once I've put all my information in that payments platform, once I'm using it and it's not easy, once I've connected my bank, etc., maybe I don't feel like switching overnight. So maybe they are in between, these companies. Clear? Another very big issue about platforms is because of the thing that I just told you, it can get difficult to get started. Okay? That's what we name the chicken or egg problem. You start a platform that's going to connect sellers of something to buyers of that something. But you start with no one. How are you going to attract the first buyer if there are no sellers? And how are you going to attract the first seller if there are no buyers? So you see the problem of getting started is that, you know, the platform at the beginning is not very attractive to anybody. And you need at least one side to be big to draw the other side in. So that's the big problem of launching one of these businesses. And there are different ways of doing it. Amazon is a typical way of launching a platform. You are a traditional business. You have a lot of customers that are coming to you. So you already have built one side of the platform. They know you, they come to buy things, even though you are a pipeline business, you sell what you bought. But you have those customers that are somewhat loyal, or at least they know you. You see that this is much easier situation to launch a platform rather than from scratch. You already have a site. Now all you need to do is tell the sellers, do you want to sell directly? Do you want to be in this platform and just connect with these people? That. If you have not built that initial user base, customer base, maybe you have to do it manually. What Just Dial did was, you know, we don't have anybody, any business putting their information here, so customers can look for a basic service on Just Dial. So we're gonna input these businesses by hand. We're gonna go to the yellow pages and we're gonna start putting that information, those phone numbers, right, into our website. So when a potential customer comes in, sees something, and someone will join, and then another. And once I have a few customers in there, I can go to the business and not other businesses and say, do you want to be in? And you kickstart that process. Another way platforms create that initial stage is what Redbus did. Redbus first focused on building a scheduling software for the bus system. So it was just a company that sold a service to one side, the bus side. Once you have all those bus companies using your software, then you open up the other side. Then you offer the customers the possibility to check online schedules and buy tickets maybe online, and now you have a platform. Someone was talking? No, okay. So that is the third way of launching. Yeah. Finally, the difficulty of monetizing a platform. That's another very big aspect of managing or launching a platform. Where's the money coming from? Big decision is which side should we charge? If you go around and you see how platforms operate, in many of them, there is one side that is not paying anything. Sometimes many sides that are not paying anything, but at least one side that is not paying anything. If you go to Facebook, we are not paying. They are not charging us any fee. If you're not charging anybody anything, obviously it's a problem. How do you make money out of that platform? You might have millions of people, but you just don't make money. So you have to charge someone. Usually you charge, whenever there is a platform with users and companies, you charge the companies because they have money and they're willing to pay to be in that platform. Advertisers, etc. But another big decision is how to charge. Do you charge a direct fee to every user of the platform? Or do you just charge a transaction fee? Whenever there is actually a sale, you take a bit out of that. Or do you charge from some premium access? So being in the platform is free, but if you want that additional service, we'll charge you. There are different ways of charging, of making money. And depending on the type of platform and the type of customers that you have in there, type of people using it, you have to choose one or the other. Of course, today we really don't have time. I'm just laying out a little bit the big topics, right? We don't have time to get too deep into this. And obviously, the problem of monetizing a platform is directly related to this growth of the platform. If you focus a lot at the beginning on monetizing, on charging people, you're going to slow down the growth. You're going to make it more difficult for people, less attractive for people to join the platform. So ideally, to go really fast into that process, you want to make it as free as possible, right? On the other hand, if you make it as free as possible and people get used to not paying for being in that platform, will you be ever able to charge? Will you be ever able to tell them, okay, it's been free until now, but from now on, you have to pay? It might not be possible. Exactly. It might not be possible. So you have to walk this balance between how fast do you want to grow and use this cycle to get really big, and how early you want to start making money. And how do you want to get your customers used to pay in some different ways, fees or transaction fees, etc. So eventually they get comfortable with paying you money. Typical distinction is some free, some premium, yes, but that is not always possible. Like the premium access has to actually be valuable and exist. What is the premium access for Facebook? Right? Can they charge from a premium access for Facebook? What is that? If Facebook is used to what we use it normally, is there a premium access in there that can be offered? It's not very clear, right? So in some cases, the premium access is clear. It's very different and valuable from the free access, but in some cases it's not. So it depends again on the type of platform that we are talking about. So you've seen this basic cycle of network effects. You see how difficult it is to get started and monetize. But the big prize that the platform is always chasing is this winner takes all, right? You grow your platform so much that you become the only competitor in the market. And no one leaves because the size is attractive. No one will leave you once you are the biggest in the market because everybody else is very small and hence, by virtue of network effects, not attractive at all. That is the price. That is the thing that they are chasing. But again, if there are no switching costs, if access is friction, has a lot of friction, winner takes all is difficult to achieve. Right? Clear? So now some of you have asked me about Netflix, Hotstar, free access versus subscription versus. So one particular, let's say, version of digital platforms, and to some extent also traditional business models, but online, are these subscription and free models. So the subscription model or a freemium model is not an alternative to a platform model. It's sort of a complement. Right? It's one of the options. Once you're running a platform model, you might make your revenues by using a subscription model, right? So it's like an addition to that platform model. But if you're charging a straight up fee for every transaction, then it's not a subscription model. It's a different type of making money, also in the same platform. Okay? So, but since many platforms and many digital business models now are running on subscriptions, it's also important to understand. And it's particularly important because, again, what I told you at the beginning, it's great when we can understand a business model by using a formula, by using 3 or 4 variables that we understand and we can measure to understand how valuable that business is. And in the case of the subscription model, we go back to that formula and we change it a little bit. I would say the profit for a subscription model is the number of customers, the number of subscribers that you have, times the average profit per subscriber. Now, again, I want to break down the second part of this formula. The number of subscribers, again, it's a measure that we know perfectly well what it is. We go to Netflix, we go to Hotstar, we go to LinkedIn, we go to YouTube, and they're going to tell us how many subscribers, YouTube obviously and LinkedIn for the premium version, how many subscribers they have. We know that. Now, how can we break down this average profit per customer in a way that we can understand a little bit more how different subscription models differ from each other? The distinction here is like this. The number of subscribers is still there, but now this average profit per subscriber is made of 4 things. The subscription fee, sort of the price, right? So we are, again, same concept as before, but just slightly different. Right? Monthly fee, price. The margin per customer, so how much money we're making out of that price that we can keep after taking out the costs. Fee times the operating margin would be how much money is left after we subtract the costs. And average customer lifetime in months, if we use the monthly fee. That is, how many months does the average subscriber stay with us before leaving? People subscribe and then unsubscribe. So in that space between the subscription moment and the unsubscription moment, we are making money out of that person. Before and after, we are not. Clear? So how long is that time? Is the average subscriber of my platform last 10 months? Or do they last 5 years on average? Because it's very different, the amount of money I can make when people stay only 10 months in my platform on average versus 5 years, paying a fee every month. So this average customer lifetime in months becomes a very important variable. And then the fourth variable that is also plays into the profit that I can make is, okay, the first three just give me the amount of profit that I can make out of every customer. But then I have to subtract how much money it cost me to get that person to subscribe. How much marketing did I have to do? How much sales effort? Right? Did I have to spend a lot of money to reach into the market and convince those people to subscribe? Then every customer will be very expensive if I had to spend a lot of money. Every subscriber will become very expensive to get. If they are coming without doing anything, of course, the acquisition cost is zero. So all the money they give me, I have to take out the cost of obviously serving them, whatever I need to spend. But all the money they're giving me goes into my pocket. So we have here 4 variables plus the first one. We have 5 variables that are driving the subscription model. So if you want to understand how Netflix makes money, this is how they make money. How Disney Plus or Hotstar make money, this is how they make money. It depends on how high or how low these 5 variables are. And they have a level of control. So what their actions, their strategy is about trying to control these 5 variables, trying to make them as big as possible. So we have a battle of streaming in India. Right? We have a number of companies and some smaller ones that are competing with each other as platforms, right? To get the content. Platforms, to some extent, I mean, they're a bit traditional models. I would call them more than platforms, but to some extent they are. They're competing with each other with a subscription model. Now, which one of these do you think is the leader right now? In India. So surprisingly, Netflix is not the leader. Netflix is number 3 in number of subscribers. Disney Plus Hotstar is the leader. And you can kind of understand why. Hotstar was already a very established brand and people were already subscribed to a lot of their content, and they have more varied content and they have cricket. So that also makes them very, very attractive. So Disney Plus Hotstar has about 3 million subscribers. And the second one, Prime Video, has 2.5 million. And then Netflix has about 1 million and something. It's not surprising because Disney and Hotstar, I said again, started from an advantage, right? They already had an existing customer base. And Prime Video comes with the subscription of Prime Delivery. So you have all the Amazon users that subscribe into Prime and they get Prime Video. So that is fueling a lot of their numbers, of course. I mean, they are making it very easy to end up as a subscriber of Prime Video. And Netflix only has content, streaming content, that they have to get each one at a time. Right? Now, if you go back to this formula, and you are in Netflix, and you are an executive in Netflix, and you realize that this formula is around 0 or negative. Let's say negative, which is pretty close to reality. It's negative. What do you do? Because this is your business model, right? This is your digital business model. And you have these 5 things to play with. And it turns out that the result is not good. So you need to improve it. So now you are pointing at actually doing things to this formula, right? Because that's the straightforward thing. Very good. You say, let's try to reduce the cost, right? So increase the operating margin. Or let's try to increase the customer lifetime. Or let's try to reduce the acquisition cost. Right? All the things that will lead to a better profit. So let's dig down, for example, in customer lifetime. Okay? Say, okay, I understand this formula, and what I want to get better at is in my customer lifetime. I want to take it from 10 months, more or less, the current one, to 12 or 15 months. And that obviously increases the profit, right? How do I increase the customer lifetime? What do I have to do to increase this customer lifetime? Extra services, good content, better. When you guys say better subscription plans, you mean cheaper? I can do a number of things, right? Why are people leaving, right? I will start doing research on that, right? Why are people leaving? Why are they unsubscribing? And I start suspecting that, maybe they don't like the content anymore. Because in the end, it's a pretty simple business, right? You go there to watch content. If there's not good content, you leave, right? And if there's a lot of good content, you stay. So they could have a problem with the amount of content. They could have a problem with the price. Especially given that now Disney Hotstar is cheaper and Amazon Prime is cheaper. So they can start looking at other options, right? So let's say they have a problem with either content or price. So if I want to keep them in as subscribers, I have to lower the price or give better content. What happens if I lower the price to this formula? Maybe what I gain in customer lifetime, I'm losing in monthly fee because it's here in the formula as well. Exactly, I'm thinning the margin, right? So they stay longer, but they are giving me less money every month. I have to run the numbers, but maybe I'm not gaining anything. Or say, let's put more good content. They'll stay longer. If I have to put more good content, obviously what's going to happen in this formula? What's going to happen to the operating margin? Costs are up, margin again goes down. So what I gain in customer lifetime, maybe I'm losing in margin, right? Gets thinner. But you see, it's not easy, but at least I understand the business. I understand how it moves. If I do this, this is what happens to my profit. That is a business model, right? So when an analyst or a venture capital firm or when an investor looks at Netflix, they look at this formula. They need to see a positive number in here. And overall, Netflix is positive in this, right? And so far, so good. They need to see, they understand these numbers and they need to see a positive number, because if the number here after doing this calculation is not big enough, Netflix can have millions and millions of customers, subscribers. It might not be a great business because it cannot make that much money. So that is the big question in understanding this business model. Can this thing make good money? And you see that the trade-offs, you know, that we are making all the time. I want to increase the number of customers, right? They want to fuel growth. So the number of customers there is always getting bigger. Okay, but if you have Disney Hotstar competing and Amazon Prime competing and Eros competing, that probably means that if you want to keep the same growth, you have to lower the price again. And some of you were saying different plans. That's a smarter way to lower the price, right? So Netflix launched this really cheap 200 rupees a month subscription for only phones, which is a way to lower the price without having to sacrifice the standard pricing. Remember, margin-driven business versus volume, you know, when you're playing with the margins, so you don't want to lose the margin too fast. And so you do it with a different service, with different features and so on. But it is a model, as you're looking at this formula, that helps you analyze and understand very well the difficulties of Netflix moving forward. There's a lot of competition, and it's not easy to increase the value of this formula. Whatever you do, you run constantly into these problems. If you want, you can think later on about other things you can maximize and do in the Netflix model and the effects on this formula. And you see that anything you raise that raises the profit also lowers the profit somewhere else. And that makes Netflix a good business, but a business also with some question marks about the power they might have. Especially when you have competitors that have content that comes for free versus Netflix that has to make all the content. Meaning, when Disney Plus links up with Hotstar, Disney Plus starts plugging all these movies, like the Marvel universe, at zero cost, because Disney owns these movies. So imagine the power of having a platform where you can plug really attractive content at zero cost and making Netflix compete with you, having to spend a lot of money for the same attractive content. That gives an edge to Disney Hotstar business. Netflix, again, has a lot of power. Also, they produce a lot of content, etc., but it's expensive. But the battle is still going on, and you can see, I mean, Padma is saying Netflix has partnered with Artel, yes, right? And Eros has partnered also with other companies, because at some point it's very difficult to keep growing with the same formula as we've seen, and you need help, and you need to link with either other companies that have great content, so they'll give it to you for free, or companies that have customers. Because the other big characteristic of platforms is that once they find difficulty in growing the normal way by themselves and running that cycle that we were talking about, they go and link up with another business that already has people. It's like buying a user base, acquiring a user base overnight. That's a way to keep the numbers up or to keep the growth up. And I mean, obviously, Disney linking with Hotstar is an example of that. And keep the growth going while overcoming some of the difficulties that you're having here. Finally, and I don't want to go too much above the time, you can go from a subscription model to what we call a freemium model. Freemium, free and premium, freemium. You can go from a subscription model to a freemium model only by adding one last variable to this formula, which is the cost of serving free users. A freemium model like Spotify, you all know Spotify because it launched in India some time ago, right? Music streaming service. And competitors like Spotify. It is a subscription model, but that also has a free option. So what is the, and YouTube as well, yes. What is the formula for that? The same one as Netflix, but there is an additional cost of taking care of the people who are not paying anything. And the simple way to look at this is considering this cost, this last cost of serving free users, as a marketing cost. Why are you spending money streaming music that is expensive for you, streaming music to people who don't pay anything? Because you hope to turn them into subscribers. Then there is the advertising money, right? But that is very marginal for Spotify. It really doesn't give them very much money. But you're hoping that by them being in the platform and listening to free music for a while, eventually they buy the subscription. So that cost of serving is really a marketing cost. It's a cost of acquisition. It's a cost of acquisition. So models like Spotify can be seen and can be analyzed very much like a Netflix model. And that is basically the simple conclusion of this. I want to stress there's a lot of value in just laying out these very simple formulas. And again, this is just one way of looking at the business model, right? From the how do they make money side. But you can see how easy it is to discuss the troubles of a platform or a business, the troubles of, or the opportunities of a business, just by looking at 4 or 5 variables that we can measure. It just gives a lot of strength to your arguments, right? You can actually measure these things and say, yes, the profit and the average lifetime profit for per user of this platform or for a business like Netflix is 20. So how does that compare to other companies? How does that compare with benchmarks? How can this be improved? How is it eroding? It gives you a lot of clarity to this kind of analysis. Any question on these concepts or examples? Because we are a bit at the end, but maybe you guys didn't understand something, you want some clarification. No questions? Good, because we're a bit at the end of our time. Excellent. So I think it's clear what I was trying to do in this session. Digital business models, the tools to understand them are the tools to understand the previous ones. But the point is, once you get into the digital space, there are features, and the possibility of network effects is one of the biggest of those features that make digital business models have their own particular characteristics. Right? And we've looked at a few of them, right? How network effects impact those models, how easy or difficult it is to make money out of them, and what variations they might have in terms of subscribing people or offering things for free and so on. Of course, each one of these points and parts can be greatly expanded, discussed, of course, how to do all these things, but that might be the topic of another session. So I think we've had enough, and thank you very much for all your comments and participation. And next week, I will bring a colleague of mine, Professor Massimo Magni, who teaches the course in leadership, change management, people management, to talk about the basic concepts, the foundations, and some examples, some good stories about managing people, right? Which is probably the other big thing that we still haven't talked about in these introductory webinars, people management. So that will be announced the day and the time, but that will be next week. Okay. Good. Thank you very much, and have a great evening. Okay. Looking forward to seeing you again soon. Cheers.